Good afternoon, everybody. I am Steve from PaintCraft. We are formerly known as Quinn the Eskimo. Many of you may have seen me at car shows or other big car events. We've been in business for over 15 years. I've worked on over 90,000 cars. My team and I, we mostly work for car dealerships. We also do quite a few car shows. We're pretty well known in Porsche circles. I even teach touch-up to the Porsche Club of America. We've been called the best touch-up company in the country by McGuire's Wax, by Porsche Club of America, and the Vice President of Mazda North America. So we've been around quite a bit. We know what we're doing. Today I wanted to talk to you very briefly about fixing scratches with wet sanding, when to do it and when not to do it. There's apparently a lot of misunderstanding. I can't tell you how many cars I see where the paint is completely scratched off and somebody tries to wet sand it. Wet sanding is a subtractive process. You're taking things away. If there's no paint left on the car, wet sanding isn't gonna magically add paint. So if the scratch goes all the way through the clear coat and the paint and the primer, well, even just the clear coat and the paint, do not wet sand. You're not fixing anything. It's just a complete waste of time. I'm here in our studio. We're gonna do a little graphic instead of actually working on a car so you can see a bit better. Let's pretend that's the top layer. And just below that, well, okay, this is the clear coat. And then a bit thicker is the paint. And then there's a very thin layer of primer down here, which is so thin it's almost insignificant for our purposes. Most scratches that you see are, there's kind of two levels of scratches. So there's a scratch that just goes through the clear coat. So, you can have a scratch that's not even through the clear coat, right? And there's kind of a rule of thumb out there that if you can flick it with your finger or you can feel it with your fingernail, it's not fixable. That's actually not true. When you do that, all you're doing is feeling that edge right there. So if that edge is pretty sharp, you're gonna feel it, and it doesn't have anything to do with how deep it is. That's just about that edge, right? If that edge is sharp, you're gonna feel it with your fingernail, but that may give you the wrong impression that it's not fixable because you can flick it with your finger. Completely untrue. So if this scratch goes all the way down and you still have a little bit of paint there, it's fixable with wet sanding. And by fixable, I mean you can make it drastically less apparent or go away almost completely. You're still gonna see it, but with skilled wet sanding, you may not have to respray the whole panel. So, maybe 20 minutes of work here may save you a few hundred or even thousands of dollars to respray a panel or panels if you can artfully wet sand. And it is an art. So you've got a scratch here. As long as you still have some paint here, and you can tell just by looking at it, if you can see the metal, and I don't just mean white. If you can see metal, don't bother. And if it looks white, that doesn't mean it went down to metal. It looks white because there's tons of, microscopic level, there's tiny, tiny little particles all sticking up through there. So, whatever scratched your car was not, had some roughness to it, and it kind of, it's kind of like when you scratch your skin, it leaves a white thing. All we're doing with wet sanding is knocking those things down so that when light hits it, it's not bouncing all over the place and making it look white. If it's perfectly smooth, it'll look like the color of your car and shiny, right? So that's all we're doing with wet sanding is getting rid of all those little nubulars. Oh, I just made up a new word, nubulars. So we're wet sanding very carefully, and it's okay if it's down into the paint. So we're just gonna make that whole thing super smooth so that when light bounces off of it, it reflects back the same color as the rest of your paint job, right? The thing you have to be careful is that you don't burn the paint while you're doing this. And burning happens when, say, you're aggressively trying to get rid of all these nubs that you see, and you end up wet sanding this down further and further, so this part of the clear coat is gone, right? So it's moving out. This part you can't see, right, because it's clear coat, right? But if you wet sand, and this will happen very quickly if you're wet sanding too aggressively, you start opening up the scratch here and here, and you know, if you're coming down further and further, you know, you're making this area look, and this becomes very apparent when you start to burn the paint or sand away the clear coat away from the scratch, trying to get at that section. And that's called burning. Once you start to burn something, do not go any further. If you really stop the millisecond that you see it, you might be able to stop it, but do not continue. You can still polish it afterwards, but do not wet sand anymore. So I would typically spend maybe, I'd say maybe 30 seconds wet sanding, and then polish it back out with an orbital buffer, battery powered or plug-in, whatever you need. So I would say for every 30 seconds of wet sanding, it's gonna take maybe 2 minutes of buffing. You may still see the scratch, but you may have accomplished your goal. You only have to knock enough of those little fingers off for it to be shiny when you polish it. It doesn't necessarily have to go away when you're wet sanding it. Also, when it's actually wet, you're not gonna see anything anyway. So it's constantly, let's say, you know, when I'm wet sanding, I use my little wet sanding pad in a squirt bottle. It's wet sand, squirt, wet sand, squirt, wet sand, squirt. And then I have a rag in my hand, and every once in a while I dry it. You have to dry it to see it, right? It's not gonna show up when it's wet because everything's shiny when it's been squirted with water. So you dry it, and then if you're feeling pretty good about it, then you can take an orbital buffer and make the whole area shiny again. And if it's gone, it's gone. If it's not, and you think you can buff it a little bit, wet sand it a little bit more, go ahead, but you're getting closer and closer to burning it. So don't keep on repeating those steps. So if you go in smaller and smaller cycles, like maybe, I don't know, if you're a beginner, maybe just 10 seconds of wet sanding and then buff it out, make it shiny again, and keep on reevaluating. The more skilled you can get, you can shorten those cycles, shorten the number of cycles, but make the cycle longer. But the more you wet sand, the more you risk burning the paint. Again, I'm Steve from PaintCraft. We've been doing this for 15 years. I've worked on well over 90,000 cars. I know this seems extraordinary. I did the math a couple times and it's about 90,000. There's not anything I really haven't seen. If you have more questions, please visit our website. It's carpaintchiprepair.com. My name is Steve. We have a fantastic team of technicians and personnel. We really care about you, and we want your car to look really good. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.